His songs have been streamed over 1 billion times. Give it up for the one and only Sia!
He sold out arenas. He won 4 Grammys. His voice turned a Batman movie soundtrack into one of the best-selling singles of the decade. Millions of people around the world can still sing along to a song that made him famous over 30 years ago. And yet, if you look for him today, you'll find a much quieter man, someone who has pulled back from the noise he once lived inside of. So what actually happened to Seal? Why does a man with that kind of legacy live such a low-key life now that he's approaching 62? The answer isn't one single moment. It's a lifetime of things most fans never fully understood. A childhood that started in chaos, a body that turned against him before he was even out of his 20s, a marriage that the whole world watched fall apart, and a mind that has quietly carried more weight than his music ever let on. To understand where Seal is now, you have to go back to where he started, because almost nothing about his beginning suggested he'd end up here. He was born Henry Olusegun Olumide Adeola Samuel on February 19, 1963, in Paddington, London, to a Nigerian mother and a Brazilian father, who were both young and financially struggling at the time. Not long after he was born, his parents made the difficult decision to place him in foster care. He was sent to live with a white foster family, the Schoolings, in Romford, Essex, where he was raised alongside their own children under the name Henry. By most accounts, those early years were stable, even warm. But 4 years in, his biological mother came back for him, and the arrangement changed everything. He returned to London to live with her, and for a couple of years, things held together. Then his mother left for Nigeria, and young Henry was sent to live with his father in Kilburn instead. That's where the real damage started. According to multiple biographical accounts of his life, his father was physically abusive, disciplining him with whips and belts in a household where fear became a normal part of growing up. On top of that, Seal was also dealing with something happening inside his own body that made him an easy target at school, a health condition that hadn't been diagnosed yet, but was already starting to leave marks on his skin. Kids can be cruel, and the combination of a difficult home life and a body that looked different from everyone else's gave a young boy very few places to feel safe. By the time he was a teenager, he'd had enough. Around the age of 15, he ran away from home and dropped out of school altogether. What's remarkable is that music found him almost by accident. He'd shown an early interest in singing, encouraged by a teacher, but it wasn't until years later, after he'd already tried to build a more practical life, that music became something he chased on purpose. He actually completed a diploma in architecture, a path that made sense for someone who needed a way to survive, not necessarily a way to dream. In the meantime, he worked whatever jobs he could find around London, odd jobs, fast food, working as a bike messenger, anything to stay afloat. But music kept pulling him back. He began singing in local clubs and bars, and eventually joined a British funk band called Push, which took him on tour to Japan. From there, restless and searching, he traveled through Thailand and India, singing wherever he could, sleeping wherever he had to, and slowly building a kind of raw, lived-in voice that can't be taught in a studio. It all changed in 1990, when he returned to London and crossed paths with producer Adamski. Together, they recorded a track called Killer, and it shot straight to #1 on the UK charts. That single cracked the door open, and by 1991, Seal had released his self-titled debut album, produced by Trevor Horn, featuring the song Crazy, which climbed into the top 10 of the Billboard Hot 100 in the U.S. He'd gone from sleeping rough on tour with a funk band to being one of the most talked about new voices in music, almost overnight. A few years later, his second album gave the world Kiss from a Rose, a song that became inescapable after it was featured on the Batman Forever soundtrack, spending 45 weeks on the U.S. charts and eventually earning him 3 Grammy Awards, including Record of the Year and Song of the Year. He'd go on to win 4 Grammys total, along with 3 Brit Awards and 2 Ivor Novello Awards for songwriting. But the same features that made Seal instantly recognizable on stage, the deep, textured scarring across his face, came from something he'd been quietly fighting since he was 21 years old. He was diagnosed with discoid lupus erythematosus, a form of lupus that attacks the skin rather than internal organs. Unlike the more dangerous systemic version of the disease, this type doesn't threaten his organs, and Seal has said he considers himself lucky that his case wasn't worse. Still, It left permanent, visible scarring, the kind that turned him into a target for stares and comments long before he understood what was happening to his own body. He's spoken about how traumatizing that period was for him, admitting that what once felt like a source of shame eventually became the thing that made him impossible to forget. In his own words, he came to realize that his body isn't who he is, and that in the grand scheme of what the disease could have done to him, he got off lightly. What most people don't know is that the scars were only half the story. For almost 30 years, Sia has also lived with anxiety and panic attacks, something he didn't talk about publicly for a long time. He's described how his first major panic attack hit him, without warning, while he was in a recording studio, a moment so intense that he genuinely believed he was having a heart attack. He was rushed to the hospital, convinced his life was ending, only to learn that what he was experiencing was a panic attack, not a cardiac event. He's since described that fear as something that returns in quiet, isolating ways, and has talked about how living with that kind of anxiety gave him a level of empathy for other people struggling in silence, something he says he wishes more people felt safe enough to talk about openly. He's leaned on exercise and staying physically active as one of the main ways he manages it, alongside being open, at least in interviews, about the fact that asking for help is nothing to be ashamed of. So even at the height of his fame, selling out shows, dominating the radio, becoming a fixture of 90s pop culture, Sia was carrying two invisible battles most of his audience had no idea about. And then, in the early 2000s, something happened that seemed for a while like it might finally balance everything out. In 2004, Sia met German supermodel Heidi Klum. She was already a major star in her own right, known globally through Victoria's Secret and her television work. And she had recently ended her relationship with Formula One executive Flavio Briatore while pregnant with her daughter, Lenny. Sia didn't hesitate. He stepped into that relationship fully, supporting Heidi through her pregnancy and treating Lenny as his own from the very beginning. The two moved quickly, engaged within a year, and married in 2005 on a beach in Mexico in an intimate ceremony. Sia later legally adopted Lenny, and the couple went on to have 3 more children together, sons Henry and Johan, and a daughter, Lou. For a man who'd spent his early life bounced between a foster home, a mother who struggled to reconnect with him, and a father whose discipline crossed into abuse, building a stable family of his own must have felt like something close to healing. For years, Sia and Heidi were presented, and largely seen themselves, as one of the industry's genuinely happy couples. They famously renewed their wedding vows nearly every year, treating it as a family tradition their children grew up considering completely normal. To the outside world, they looked, for a long stretch, close to untouchable. Then, in January 2012, it ended. The couple announced their separation, citing irreconcilable differences after 7 years of marriage, in a joint statement that stressed continued love and respect even as they acknowledged they had grown apart. The split wasn't quiet for long. Sia was notably candid in the aftermath, at one point telling TMZ he wished Heidi had waited to get involved with her bodyguard until after they had actually separated, a comment that made headlines given how quickly rumors of a new relationship on her side had surfaced. Heidi, for her part, was more guarded publicly, saying only that every couple goes through hard periods and that she didn't feel the need to air the details for the sake of their children. What followed for Sia was a much quieter chapter. He didn't dive into a new high-profile relationship or chase headlines. Instead, he focused on staying present as a father, sharing custody with Heidi, and working to remain involved in each of his children's lives despite the new distance between two households. Interestingly, his current relationship didn't come from some new corner of his life. It came from someone who had already been close to him for years. Laura Strayer had worked as his personal assistant back when he was still married to Heidi. Even living for a period in the Los Angeles home the couple shared. Their relationship shifted from professional to romantic years after his divorce, and the two have been together since around 2021, keeping things notably low-key and out of the tabloid spotlight compared to his marriage to Heidi. Musically, Sia never fully disappeared, but he also stopped chasing the version of fame he once had. His 2017 album, Standards, was a covers project, a tribute to the classic songs he'd grown up loving, rather than a bid for new chart success. After that, he became far more selective, choosing occasional television appearances, including stints as a coach on The Voice Australia, rather than grinding out album cycles or try and compete in a music landscape increasingly built around short-form clips and viral moments. He's continued to tour, and as recently as 2024, he was performing again after taking time off for health reasons, showing up at events like the Beauvoir Session with a set of jazz standards. In 2025, he even announced he was working on new original music for the first time in over a decade, reuniting with longtime collaborator Trevor Horn, and he made an unexpected pop culture appearance voicing a literal seal in a Mountain Dew Super Bowl ad, reworking Kiss from a Rose into a light-hearted jingle. So the picture isn't quite one of a man who vanished. It's more that Seal has spent the back half of his career deliberately choosing quiet over volume. Part of that is simply about protecting his health. Living with lupus for 4 decades means his body doesn't recover the way it once did, and long tours take more out of him now than they did in his 30s and 40s. Part of it is about protecting his mental health, too, after decades of managing anxiety. Stepping back from the constant churn of promotion, social media, and public appearances is a retreat. It's maintenance. And part of it is simply what happens to almost anyone who spends decades at the absolute center of public attention, and then watches the industry shift toward younger artists and different platforms. That kind of transition is difficult for any performer, let alone one who built his entire identity and his healing around being seen and heard after a childhood where he so often wasn't.